All right, guys. So I've got Ryan Kriegshauser in. I said that right? Yep.
That's right.
Awesome. Okay. I totally cheated. He told me exactly how to say it. So, but I did nail it
Well,
the first time.
well, if you want some useless information, it's German for House of War, so
Oh,
little
man.
interesting background for.
I love that. I love that. House of War. So Ryan's an attorney in the state of Kansas, and he's got some really interesting just stories and shifts in his business. I would think some attorneys are potentially really busy right now, like maybe bankruptcy attorneys. Those guys are probably all queued up and have gotten a lot of calls. And then other attorneys have had their businesses just completely evaporate before their eyes. Courts are closed down. Businesses aren't spending money. There's not a lot of business activity. And so imagine probably many more attorneys kind of fit in that bucket. But I'm excited for Ryan to share his story about how he's shifted a bit in this climate. This whole show is about, as everyone knows, is about positive shifts that are happening, productive shifts that are happening in this environment. And Ryan and I were chatting about how some people are in this kind of fight, flight, or freeze mode, and then other people, maybe through sheer necessity to keep the lights on, are just making stuff happen. And the entrepreneur in me loves to hear those stories about those pivots and creating something out of pixie dust. Those are the fun stories to hear. Sounds like Ryan's doing a little bit of that right now. So Ryan, you're an attorney in this environment. What were you doing pre-COVID in your normal law practice?
Right. Well, I was general counsel at the Office of the Kansas Securities Commissioner for a number of years. And so my practice is only about a year and a half old. And so it's a relatively new practice, a burgeoning practice. And most of my work was securities, capital formation, working with small companies who want to raise money, get out there and compliance with securities laws, get out there and build their business, finding investors and getting the lights turned on and the business is up and running. Well, and as you can imagine, when coronavirus hit, a lot of that work just evaporated instantaneously because investors don't know what the economy is going to be like. Businesses that were going to get up and running, just with the uncertainty, said now is not the time to go out there and raise capital. It was interesting because I did have a few projects move forward. And, for a lot of this work, you're doing risk disclosures. And so I was drafting coronavirus risk disclosures, just basically saying, hey, this is the situation we're in now, and there's a lot of uncertainty. But other than that, a lot of my work just evaporated overnight. So I had to pivot to what do I do next?
Mm-hmm. And so this is the story of, I think, so many of us. I'm sitting in an empty barbershop right now. I've got my only friends are the alcohol bottles behind me here. But yeah, immediately we've been left with almost nothing in terms of revenue. But I think while we're not rich in maybe revenue right now, or net worths have declined, or layoffs have happened, we've become rich in so many other things, like being creative and being innovative. So tell me about how your creative journey and going through, I have no revenue coming in any longer, to where you are right now.
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned to you before we got recording, I'm a Navy Reserve guy. So I started my firm right after a deployment to Afghanistan. So it was not unusual for me to get myself into a situation to have to decide what I needed to change and move on. And so that's just what I did here. And a lot of my businesses, like I said, were small businesses, and they were now faced with this situation of dealing with counties, and then ultimately the state, when the state issued its stay-home order, but determining whether they're essential or non-essential. And I basically shifted my practice to almost complete coronavirus regulation, if you will. I mean, it was totally brand new. No one had any experience in it. These stay-home orders were brand new. And so working with smaller businesses and churches navigating these stay-home orders, first at the county level, and then the state of Kansas ultimately issued a statewide order. But I had companies with different locations in different counties, and they were treated differently depending on how that county issued their stay home order. And so helping to navigate that and pushing back on some jurisdictions where, the Homeland Security and the CISA guidelines are pretty broad. And so you have some supply line manufacturers that, yes, they are making something that doesn't seem essential, but if you look at the Homeland Security guidelines, that supply chain is important, and having that infrastructure in place is important in case they want to shift to making PPE, for example. You might be making clothing one day, but then if you start shifting and making PPE, all of a sudden your clothing, you were selling shirts, well, that's not important anymore. But if you start making PPE, you're essential, and you can operate, and you can operate at full steam. And so I was helping clients navigate that and switching where they could over to what the governments were considered essential and able to get up and running. And they did so. I mean, you have to be concerned about liability with your employees, but they were putting in more safeguards than most, quote unquote, essential businesses were. And so they were, producing items safely. And so the last month was one of my biggest months, it seems. I was incredibly busy once I made that shift.
Yeah, I love that. And I imagine it's probably been quite a bit of fun. Maybe I feel like it would be, or at least exciting or full of energy to just be in the middle of this chaos, especially a guy like you who goes to Afghanistan and has been in the face of adversity, but just being thrown in there and having to figure stuff out. Imagine your soldier training, your military training probably played a role in that, just at least preparing you mentally to be able to handle all of the change all at once.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to look at the situation and see what's coming down the pipe and saying, how can I, what you're talking about, how can I adjust to make the most of this and take that momentum that's coming against me, let it go by me and use it to propel me forward, and just pivot.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm looking at your credentials here on LinkedIn, and you could probably create a new credential after all of this, a new COVID designation on your on your credentials.
That's so probably true.
That may be your next thing when you get done dealing with all the business owners, is you can start knighting fellow attorneys in their COVID designation.
Well, and that's the bizarre thing about this situation. I mean, it's coming to an end at some point. These stay-home orders are going to be lifted. But then the next question comes out, the CARE Act was passed at the federal level, paycheck protection. All these businesses are trying to figure out, how can I keep the lights on? And so I told a few friends this, the bar is going to be fed by coronavirus for a long time, either litigation, unfortunately, for some of these employers, and whether or not, the firings were rightful or laying people off. I mean, unfortunately, that's going to get very difficult to determine going forward. And then businesses are going to have to figure out how to finance operations. And unfortunately, small businesses are often left without the bankers and lawyers that the large businesses are. And so you got to make sure that they're able to get to these are SBA programs. Small businesses should have access to them. But as we're finding, it's more and more difficult for small businesses to get at those resources, and lawyers need to help them. Yeah.
I mean, we'll probably have you back on the show 3 months from now talking about post-COVID activity from a legal standpoint, operations, and certainly there's going to be a lot of that, like you said. Right now, though, there are still businesses that are having trouble getting funding, getting the unemployment office to answer the phone, getting the SBA to answer the phone, or send them an email on some update. You have people that applied for EIDL loans 2 weeks ago and have received no response whatsoever. I know attorneys like you and other business consultants are trying to help people get in line, get to the front of the line if they can, because the concern is that the funds are going to run out and you got to wait for a phase 4 of funding, and God knows how long that'll take. What advice are you giving business owners right now? Let's say you've got a big business owner, entrepreneur community at the Gents Place. I know each situation is different, but just generically, if someone has not even applied for funding yet, or they haven't heard back, what advice are you giving them right now?
Well, the folks who haven't applied that think that they might need it, they needed to do that yesterday and get in line and get the applications in. And a big part of it is what bank you work with, because some of the bigger banks, a lot of these applications are done through the lenders. And so if you're with a big bank that just isn't specifically designed to work with small businesses, I've had a lot of small business clients say that the community bank has been a better option for them, because those community banks are willing to work with those small businesses. They're members of the community and really try and push those applications forward to the largest extent possible. So look at your lender and see if you can build a mutually beneficial relationship with maybe even a smaller bank. It may be counterintuitive that you think, oh, Bank of America is a bigger bank, they'll help me get through these programs more quickly and efficiently. But as I found, they're focused on the people you're talking about, those big employers, where sometimes that community bank wants to see that liquor store, that retail store stay in business, and they're more willing to help and give that specialized attention.
Mm-hmm. Well, we talked on the show a few times about this being different in 2008 in so many ways, but one of the ways that I'm really excited about it being different, it seems, once the money comes in, is that in 2008, the big banks got the bailout. They got all the money, right? And hopefully it trickled down through the system. In this case, it seems like either the government has learned their lesson or there was some change in approach where the small businesses are getting the funding and the big businesses are actually excluded from it, right? You got more than 500 employees in a location, figure that out on your own. And so I'm excited about that. Again, the caveat is as long as the money gets in the bank account, it's all theoretical at this point.
Well, and when you look at proportionality, I mean, the first round kind of went through the SBA, but then you have the Main Street program that came, quick on the heels of the SBA programs that look more like that TARP-esque, that 2008 type funding. So, and it's bigger. I think that package is much bigger in the long run. But yeah, hopefully the SBA does its job and gets that money to the people who need it. And you mentioned that 500 person per location requirement, and that's specifically directed at restaurants and those types of businesses that were directly impacted by this. And those businesses are actually exempted from a lot of the size requirements. So if you're a franchise, you have a lot more options. And so that's what lawyers need to do in this situation, is talk to their clients and find out, yeah, you might have a few thousand employees, but they're spread out through franchises, and it's a restaurant, and so you might be able to have access to some of those resources.
Mm-hmm. We were discussing these entrepreneurs and business people that are just frozen right now. What are you advising somebody to do when you may have gotten a phone call or many phone calls like this, where they're just like, Ryan, I heard you could help me. I don't know what to do. Is there a certain place that they should just start? Is it getting their mind right? Is it getting certain business documents or, but how can we kind of speed that process up for when they do call someone like you, that they're starting on maybe, step 3 instead of step 1?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to what type of business it is. I mean, if it's a restaurant, they're doing the carry out orders and that type of thing. But you have other kind of more nuanced situations, like take a furniture store, for example. Mm-hmm. Like on its face, it doesn't seem like it's essential. But then you start digging into it. You look at what the stay-home order says. You look at Department of Homeland Security, what their guidelines are. You find out that furniture store, it sells home office equipment. Well, that's interesting. Now, the stay-home orders have provisions for making sure that people can work from home. Well, selling office furniture arguably will fall in that category. They sell flooring. Well, construction is often exempted in the CISA guidelines. And so you start looking at your business as it relates to what those guidelines are and what the stay-at-home order says, and you start building your new business around it. And what I found is when you engage the local jurisdictions or even the state and say, this is what I'm doing, this is why it's essential, and this is what I'm doing to protect my employees while doing it, I haven't had a county or the state say no yet. I mean, it's just a matter of putting it in terms that that say, listen, I want to be part of the national effort. This is how it fits into that national effort to combat this virus. And this is what I'm doing to protect my people. And jurisdictions, I mean, no one wants to shut down the economy here. We're just doing it to mitigate risk. And if you can show the government, listen, the risk is mitigated and this is important, the government more by and large is going to say, we're going to need this company's tax revenue at some point. They're being responsible. Let's let them operate.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of talk right now in Texas. I'm not sure about in Kansas, but certainly even at a federal level to reopen the economy. You know, we're going to get some news this week from the president. We're going to get some news from our governor about potentially reopening in some form or fashion at some point. It might be 2 or 3 weeks out, might be certain businesses get to open. When we do reopen, are there any new liabilities that business owners should be concerned about? Like, do we need to put masks on our people? Do we need to make sure we're, you know, practicing social distancing, even if it's not a quote, a requirement by the government? Like, are you seeing anything or recommend anything post-opening to limit our liability as business owners?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. You saw Walmart, you know, I mean, they got hit with a wrongful death suit here recently. And so businesses, like I tell my clients, you know, I get asked, can I get sued for that, this or that? And the answer is you can get sued for anything. It's whether or not ultimately through the process and the pain of going through the litigation, you'll ultimately be held liable. But that still is true post-corona. So, I mean, yeah, the possibility that you might have employees that get infected, and that's something you have to take into account. And so I think once you see states reopening, as you say, you're going to switch from this essential versus non-essential framework to a safe versus unsafe framework, where we're not looking at the service you provide as much as the way in which you provide it. And so I think, you know, anticipating that, companies can start putting those pieces together for themselves and say, how can I set up my business or my office space to be safe, you know, post opening? And I think those things will fall in line with what the government ultimately wants to do to reopen, is they want to keep people safe and let the economy get back up and running at the same time.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it seems like at a basic level, follow the government's orders. That probably puts you, you know, in the best position if, you know, there's a legal case of some kind, that you followed the orders of your local, state governments, federal governments, versus saying, yeah, I know they don't want me to open, or I know they told me to use hand sanitizer, but we're just going to do our own thing. Imagine those businesses are, you know, pretty clearly putting themselves at risk. And we saw a lot of that going into this, is that people were defying, you know, state and local authorities. So I know as an attorney, you would never advise that. So we'll put
there's
that
always
out
going
there.
to be, always going to be a negligence cause of action. And so, you know, I mean, if you're letting people work sick and without masks, I mean, there's that bottom level of what is the standard of care, and did you violate that, you know, given the situation? So yeah, you always have to be conscious of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, I could talk to you for hours, and I know you bill for your time, and I know that you're also are serving it, paying it forward and serving first here and just hopping on with me. You know, I think that it goes without saying that in this environment, if business owners are frozen, they don't know what to do, that it's nice to know that there are attorneys out there that are beginning to specialize in this, that are jumping into it and consuming all of that knowledge for us. It goes without saying to talk to an attorney that you trust, because I know some attorneys that have no clue what's going on. So it's not just find any attorney, but it's find someone who's in the thick of it like you, and probably many others out there who probably have been through it with other clients already. So I appreciate you spending some time with me. I'm going to let you get back to your to all of your work over there, and you're pivoting. And you know, next time I look at LinkedIn, I hope to see that extra designation on your profile. So,
Well, keep it up. Thanks for doing this.
yeah, you bet, my friend. Take care.
All right. Have a good one. Bye-bye.